Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, where we're going to talk a little bit about secure developer access at Decisiv. And really appreciate you all joining us today. I'm Mark Herring. I look after marketing here, and I'm joined by Hunter Madison, who's a senior engineer at Decisiv. Welcome, Hunter.
Good morning, Mark, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being so gracious with your time and agreeing to spend some time with us, and really looking forward to the lessons you've learned and to tell the audience what you've learned along in your journey. So why don't you maybe just give us a little brief overview of who you are and sort of your background.
All right. Well, as you said, I'm Hunter Madison. I'm a senior engineer at Decisiv. I come from a background of doing site reliability engineering and full stack engineering together. So my career has basically had me go from end user computers all the way down to just above hardware in solving problems, fixing things, getting people secure access to tools, to application upgrades, to user experience design, and generally making things just happen with computers.
That's awesome. So before we dig down into maybe a little more on that, what does Decisiv do? Since for the audience, you've told me some of the good stories, but our audience doesn't know. So what does Decisiv do?
All right. At a very, very rough and very, very high level, Decisiv is a company that does your equivalent of your health records, but for commercial assets. So the idea being that if you think like a large truck that you'd see on the road, when that truck breaks down, it costs you money as a business owner. So you want to get the thing repaired and back on the road as fast as possible. Our platform helps manage that relationship from when it rolls off the line, as we partner with a bunch of manufacturers, to when it shows up at the shop, to when you have to go and do your routine maintenance on it. So again, it's like your full service medical record system, but for a truck.
Really interesting. I just heard from our producer here that we don't have your video on. Can you switch that on, or we got?
Apologies.
That's okay. Perfect. We can see you as well and the slides. Wonderful. So tell me a little then on terms of understand what Decisiv does. And I know you're a senior engineer. What does that mean for Decisiv? What are you responsible for at Decisiv?
So I'm part of the technology and engineering team. So I'm responsible for a lot of the infrastructure and the applications that the infrastructure supports. So I primarily deal a lot with, application performance monitoring, Amazon, and then, also touching on some of the security aspects of this stuff. How do I get developers to, securely deploy things, get access to, production and non-production environments to look around and do their job.
Excellent. And I know we were talking about a little bit before the webinar, you joined Decisiv and there was this major sort of pain points. Do you want to elaborate on that? What were the major sort of pain points you were experiencing as you joined and that you tried to go and solve?
So when I joined Decisiv, so something just to keep in mind, because we're playing in, the trucking space and we're so interconnected with everyone in that space, we have some very, very, very large customers who, when you get up to that like massive multinational enterprise size, they want you to go through security audits and have these controls and have these processes in place. So when I came on, we were really kicking off a lot of that work. And it was this transitional time of us going from, the old style, very simple, very basic patterns of access control over to, a more heavy, auditor friendly, air quotes, patterns of control.
Interesting. So you're keeping the auditors happy as well. Were there any sort of changes to infrastructure at the same time? I think you mentioned you're doing a bit of a lift and shift happening at the same time.
Oh yeah. So we were like essentially, and we're still finalizing this because I'd argue infrastructure's never been finalized, but this was also the
nor will be. Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah. But this was also us really going and starting to take some refactors from us going from in a co-location center in Richmond to Rackspace to AWS and towards a more like cloud first architecture, and shedding off the concepts of oh well, we have access to a physical server, someone can drive and put their hands on it, to well, maybe everything's ephemeral in the cloud, and maybe we're going to have 100 servers, maybe we're going to have one server, and we're just going to let some automated process figure that out for us.
That's really interesting. So yes, sort of this whole push to more ephemeral and sort of cloud thing. How did the developer population, or the engineering population, as you got there, how were they dealing with this? Were they, super excited about the auditors looking into their business? I assume not, but yeah.
Oh, I've found, I've been through, 2 of these security audit type deals in my career. And, generally speaking, nobody's particularly happy when an auditor shows up and says, I need you to check 10,000 boxes every time you make a change. But I do think, we probably have hit like a pretty happy medium where we have all the information that we want for, getting through some of these audits and, having those controls in place and, while still letting people do what they normally do.
Really interesting. And I know you've been using Teleport for a while, so I'm going to put a little poll up here just to find out from our audience, audience out there, if you want to just fill in the poll and just tell us, if you've ever heard of Teleport, hey, I'm already a customer, I'm using the stuff, just so we'll let that run, and we'll close that maybe in about 3 or 4 minutes. But tell me, Hunter, how did you find Teleport? How did you find us?
Oh man, so this was like maybe back when you guys started the company. I think you had like a Hacker News post talking about version 1. And, at the time I was very, very much a developer, and it's like, oh yeah, this is a really cool idea. And just, throughout the years, it's, popped up again. I've run your open source version for myself personally for a while. And, coming to Decisiv and being like, oh man, we totally are going to have this problem with the audit, and being able to go and say, but, oh, I can just get, Teleport in and that solves it, I think is, really, really nice.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I definitely appreciate you being an early adopter and, using our product. But maybe moving a little away from just pure tech, how did you deal with engineers sort of dealing with change, right? I mean, it's like you're implementing something new. How do you deal with the cultural changes there?
Oh yeah, so I mean, that's basically my entire slide deck.
Yeah, perfect. So we'll dig into that one.
Yeah.
And then maybe just before we sort of dig down into your sort of slide deck there, tell me in terms of like what's, we're obviously living in COVID times, as we all know, but I think there's also other things that have always been true. What do you think are the bigger problems that engineers are having to address today around the sort of security side?
Yeah, so I think, fundamentally we have to deal with security audits. And when you think about security audits, like really, I think people think in terms of auditable standards, things like ISO 27002, 9000, which isn't necessarily a security audit, but still talks about having this auditable process. You have PCI, FedRAMP, NIST, GDPR, CCPA, and fundamentally, there are 2 core questions that all these audits basically boil down to. It's who can do what when, and it's why did someone do something then? And the problem with answering these questions at scale is that if you want to design a secure system, you basically have to make it usable. I think Don Norman, who, for those who aren't super familiar, he was like the big UI guy at Apple, and his book, Design on Everyday Things, is a mainstay in every single usability course across the country. Like, absolute legend, and I highly suggest the book if you've never read it, albeit it was written in the 80s and is kind of dated. But he put this, paper together for interactions. And there's this quote that I love from it, which is, the audience either not understanding the rationale or simply disagreeing with the necessity for the procedures imposed upon them, see these as impediments to accomplishing their jobs. And to me, that really speaks to, the problem that Teleport solves when it comes to all these auditable standards is it's like, you have to make something that's usable and auditable. But first and foremost, it has to be usable, because if it's like, it has to be secure, period, and that's table stakes. But if it's not usable, no one's going to use it. They're going to work around it, and you're going to be in a worse off place than you were. So,
Can you just ask one sort of follow-up question? When you say usable, and just thinking of the engineering population, what does that look like to you? What does usable mean, or what are the attributes of it?
when I generally think of usable in terms of software engineering, I think that you are either going to, so there's the, Indiana Jones, statue for the bag of sand type usability, where you've made a change and it's completely invisible to them, which is usable because their experience hasn't changed, or you're going to save them some amount of time. And, this could be things like, hey, we brought in a new CI tool, your builds are 50% faster, so you're saving them 50% of their build time, of course, the cost of the day. Like, that's just inherently more usable because they can get work done faster. I think for security products, it's getting their access to be faster. So previously, when we managed all of the SSH keys by, our provision management process to get someone set up, it would take like 6 to 12 hours just having to, let it run everywhere because we had that many hosts. Now with Teleport, the day that they start and the day that their manager says they're ready to start using, taking advantage of servers, they can click a button in our identity provider Okta, and we hit an approve button on the back end that creates our auditor entry, and they have SSH access to everything that their team has responsibility over. So I think that's like, core for usability. It's like making those loops faster.
Excellent, thanks.
So, fundamentally, I want to run through like how Decisiv fixed this with Teleport. And basically, I have a couple of vignettes talking through various stages that we've went through and just various like bits of understanding that I've learned having to admin Teleport from 3.2 up to 4.2. And then I want to walk you through how we designed our cluster, just to give you guys, if you're thinking about adopting Teleport, a bit of an understanding as to the trade-offs of both types of things. So first and foremost, Teleport at a high level. It's a highly available cluster of authentication and proxy servers, which basically creates an SSH bastion that's auditable and gets tied into your IDP. It also will act as an X509 certificate authority, something that I take advantage of because if you've never had to distribute passwords or certificates to people before, it's an absolute headache, especially if your company doesn't have a single centralized password manager. It'll also store everything in S3 and DynamoDB, which is really nice because it's stateless, and it's really nice because you get access to that data. We host everything in DynamoDB and S3, and like we're entirely AWS, so this talk does assume that you're hosting it in AWS. I believe you can do Google Cloud as well. I just never played with it. And then, finally, it records everything in multiple auditable forms. So, win, win, win. The first bit that I want to touch on is the IDP. And what I've realized running Teleport for, 2 years is that you really want to configure your IDP well. Basically, if you can push groups through your IDP, which turn into Teleport roles, but also a bunch of attributes, which you have access to in those Teleport roles, it really lets you cut down on the amount of administrative overhead with Teleport. Something that Teleport doesn't do particularly well today is support tools like Terraform or other configuration management tools for its administrative interface. So the less that you need to go in and monkey around with roles on 4.2 and 4.3, just the smoother it becomes. So for us, our first time flow works like this. When the person joins the company, HR will set their Teleport team. That'll create a bunch of group mappings under the hood to give them roles, and then they can go through the request workflow that Okta has, since we use Okta as our IDP. That gets them access to the Teleport application. And from there, that Teleport team role mapping and the request workflow come together, pass out the data that we need over to Teleport. That gets them all the SSH access that they need. We then take advantage of Teleport's labeling system. So each node can have a bunch of labels. They're either static or you can drive them off of commands. So for example, I can pull in things like the instance ID, account ID, the tags that it has, so on and so forth. They'll all show up in Teleport, and this is how it'll look in the UI. You can use all of these labels when you're evaluating your roles to give people access. So in our case, we have a single...
I'm going to just pause for a second there.
Yep.
Just so the audience knows, we will be putting these slides all up on Slideshare. So if you're trying to frantically take screenshots as we go through here, don't worry. Hunter's been gracious enough to share these things, but just wanted people freaking out going, oh my God, I got to make 2 slides away of taking photos. So yeah, carry on. Just want to let the audience know.
Yeah, no problem. So And also everything I'm showing is also present in the admin guide and the RBAC guide as well. So don't feel like you're completely lost. But yeah, just back to what I was saying, we have one single role for all developers. And the way that we do that is that we interpolate their team in with those labels. So we just pull all the labels from our Amazon control plane, give them to Teleport, and then use them in Teleport to do the access. So every developer, like we have a single shared restricted developers user that everyone uses. If you wanted to get fancy, you could actually make it, the SSH user come from your IDP. I don't right now because, we're keeping it simple. We're using node labels to basically say every server that your team's responsible for, you have access to. And then we're throwing in some deny operations to say like any server that's tagged for my team, you'll never get access to ever. And then we set up some standard options, like I say that your maximum session time to life is 8 hours, which is your standard American working day. And then this is the one role that we have. It's really simple to debug. It's really simple for people to keep in their head. Servers that my team are responsible for, I see in Teleport. The other bit about Teleport, and this is why I strongly feel that Teleport right now is probably best in show in the market for this type of tooling, is the fact that under the hood, Teleport is literally just an SSH server. So if you set up, and again, this is basically coming straight from the Teleport guide. I just added a couple of lines to make it easier on myself. You put this in your SSH config, and every single tool that works with certificate authentication and can handle an SSH config works with Teleport. So you do one TSH login at the start of your day, all of your tools will work for your session TTL. Ansible works. I've got an inspec, Capistrano to work. OpenSSH and Windows works. This is also how, if you have Windows clients, you're going to have them log in just with TSH-EXE just to get the certs and use OpenSSH for Windows. I will say though, like some Java data science-y tools for some reason don't seem to really support certificate auth. So if you have like key critical tools that end users rely upon, I'd highly suggest getting the open source version set up and just testing that out before necessarily saying like, yeah, we're going to use Teleport for everything and have them use this SSH access to go through those tools. The other bit that I've learned past couple of years, which I think is really important, especially for like new Teleport admins to understand, is the fact that if you have processes that were started by Teleport users, you can figure out the exact session that those processes were started in and get that history, which if you've ever had to debug a server that someone's gone in and touched a bunch of stuff on, this is really, really helpful. So under the hood in your Teleport binary that you have, which is your node binary that lives on disk, it'll set a bunch of environment variables for every session. And because of the way that just Unix environment process hierarchies work, you can PS tree and find a parent that will have these environment variables in their environ. The two that I think you should know is SSH Teleport user, which is their Teleport username, and Teleport session. So quick and dirty example, I started a screen session. I found its PID, checked its environ, and you can see, my username and my session ID there. So if I wanted to get, some context on why this session was started, I can look at that session ID in the console. And if I just want to know who it is, I have my username. I've had to do this to like every director that we've had twice now. It's a very, very useful trick when you're looking at servers that, people have jumped on and off to do a bunch of debugging on. Now, that trick's really good. This is also why I absolutely love having Teleport, which is the fact that you can do what I just showed you proactively. So Teleport does record every session by default, no configuration. It works on a bunch of different Linux distributions, including older kernels, which is great. You really can't search for them at scale because under the hood, it's a zip file that they have like a JSON and a text file together, and you do some magic stitching and it makes the movie. But there's also something called enhanced session recording. So you do have to have a newer Linux kernel. I believe it's 4.19 and up for it. But you turn that on, you get access to this session command event, which if you're living in DynamoDB for these sessions like I do, you can pipe that into your SIEM using a DynamoDB stream and the new image option. And it really lets you just find problem commands quickly. So we use Okta as our SIEM log management tool. I have all the data, sorry, Humio as our SIEM log management tool. I'm pumping all of our log events into there. So I get to see, who did it, the program, the return code, the session ID, and then, what index it was in that session. And the cool part is now that it's in Humio, I can set alerts, send them to Slack when people start things like screen or, connect to a network host that I don't want them connecting to, or, run pSQL. Just, world is your oyster once you start getting this data into a tool like this. And I think it's, really, really powerful that Teleport is starting to offer these types of features because, this is basically hyper proactive, hyper searchable, very, very easy to audit, which is great. The last bit I want to touch on before getting into some infrastructure bits is the fact that you can use Teleport for other things. So you do have an X509 certificate of authority, which is great because every time they use TSH, they have a new X509 certificate, which has been refreshed, which is limited for your session TTL. And you can use a TCTL command on your auth server to get your cert authority, create a couple of new certificates based off of that, and pass it out to tools like MariaDB, Postgres, OpenVPN, which support certificate authentication out of the box, but not necessarily your IDP. So like we use this with OpenVPN and AWS right now, which is really great because I get all the advantages of OpenVPN, I get all the advantages of certificate authentication, and they already have access to the management tool that they need. I've also done this for Postgres and MariaDB, just to keep in mind, like you can see, groups mapped as organization, valid logins mapped as locality, and the username is the common name, but the tool will determine what it's able to necessarily parse. For example, Postgres will only let you use the common name. MariaDB will actually let you look at the entire certificate's presented attributes and do auth based off of that. So I think finally, I just want to walk you through how we set up our cluster and some of the thought process behind that. In case you want to go and take the plunge and do it yourself, you at least have someone else's example to look at. I like to think of this in terms of tiers, where you have a user tier at your bottom left and your logging tier in your upper right. And I'm just going to run through all the decisions that we made at each of these levels and try to give you guys, just learn from my mistakes, basically. So I think at the start, you have a user tier. You really got to understand, where your users are and then where your nodes are. So for us, we're Decisiv's a global remote company. I have Okta as my IDP, but I'm dealing with people all around the globe, essentially from St. Petersburg to Chile in terms of time zone. Node-wise, we have a lot of Amazon accounts, and we basically do a light form of account vending right now. And as we've been doing more and more cloud work, we're pushing to a stronger and stronger form of it. So being able to do things with like cross-account STS and SSM to get joint tokens is really, really helpful. Keeping that in mind, you basically move on to, how do you want to set up your cluster based off of your user requirements? There are 3 ways that you can do that, 2 of which I would suggest. There's either the tunnel mode or the trusted mode. So the tunneled mode is you would run a single cluster. Nodes are going to connect over the internet. You have a single SAML service provider. This is kind of what their Teleport cloud offering, I believe, works and looks like. So for us, the way that we do it, we have one dedicated Teleport AWS account. All it does is run Teleport in the Teleport infrastructure, and all the nodes get latched to that. It's really, really clean. It's easy to debug, and it works. You also can do a trusted cluster mode, where each account gets its own Teleport cluster. You have one SAML IDP, which is shared through your primary master cluster. We used to do this up till 4. What I have found is 1, users have to really be aware of switching the clusters, and 2, when a trusted cluster breaks, it's very, very painful to debug and fix. If I were to talk as long as I needed to on fixing these things, it would probably be a college course. So keeping that in mind, since we're in Amazon and we want this to be highly available, we need some load balancers. I found that the application load balancers work great for the web bits. Basically, just be aware that you want to change your timeouts to get the web console to work, since the WebSocket implementation doesn't heartbeat in such a way that the ALB likes it. You also can let Teleport generate its own self-signed certificates, because ALBs don't actually check SSL. They use a different security feature that is accessible only to Amazon to make your connection secure. So it does, cut out a couple of steps in your configuration management. And the network load balancers do work for the proxy stuff and the SSH stuff. Just be aware that you're going to constantly see error messages in the log coming from the NLB, because the way that they heartbeat is they connect to the auth or proxy socket, open a TCP connection. If they get a TCP response, they immediately close it, and that's a heartbeat. It's very frustrating. I have yet to find a way to make that disappear. If anyone knows of one, please tell me, because it's like pages of these things. So from like an application perspective, just thinking how we host Teleport, we're running it in an auto-scaling group. So one host per AZ. We're stacking the auth and proxy components together on the same host, because again, Teleport's one binary with just different configuration modes you turn on and off. And I found that Amazon's SSM, if you need a break glass mechanism to get direct access to the Teleport host for troubleshooting, works wonderfully, not only for it being your break glass, but also just for general management and use. So you can use SSM documents to do a lot of the config things. Basically, like, this setup works. Like, I don't have any direct access into that account. I have to go through SSM to touch things. Outside of that, everything's bottled up, and the only like publicly accessible things are our load balancers, which is great from a security perspective. And finally, just thinking about data storage, we put all of the session recordings in S3. DynamoDB stores the state in the events. This means our hosts are stateless. So when I go to upgrade, I just say on my auto-scaling group, everything is 0 with the old launch configuration. Give me 1 instance for the new launch configuration. Run that for a bit to let the upgrade finalize if there are any migrations. Go back up to 3. Very stateless, very painless. It takes like 20 minutes to do an upgrade. It's great. And then because we're sticking the events in the DynamoDB, like I showed previously, we have that Simon integration with new image. So I get a bunch of really, really cool searching stuff. So yeah, I think, just keeping in mind when you're thinking about doing Teleport, it's worth sitting down and thinking through, how you want this designed and how you want this figured out. For us being a global remote company with a really, really heavy emphasis on, basically just having dynamic servers, spinning stuff up, turning stuff off, a lot of AWS accounts for isolation. I think our setup works pretty well. It might not work the best for you, so, play with it and experiment with it, but hopefully, this type of structure at least gives you a good starting point. So
awesome,
yeah,
Hunter. Yeah, definitely appreciate that. That was great. I mean, and definitely sort of giving us your architecture. So yeah, for the audience out there, there is a little Q&A button with Zoom. So if you want to put it there, we'll get to some of the open questions. I have a couple that have come through as well. Maybe the first one I have here is, how hard was it to get started with Teleport? So I know you have to go back in the Wayback Machine, but yeah, someone new, how hard is it to get up and running?
So I think for, simple setups where you have a single Amazon account or just like a single set of servers, Teleport's not particularly difficult. I think the big things just to remember that I, always get burned on, it's like, are you running like IP tables? Do you have your network access NACLs set up properly? Basic stuff like that. If you're going to run like a single, just one Teleport server, that's all you have to think about. If you're doing HA, a little bit more comes into place, and actually rolling everything out and getting it installed. I'd say it's easier now than it was when I started, because back when I started, I had to make my own RPM packages for Teleport. Today, you can just download RPMs, which is just amazing.
Oh, awesome. And then another question was, which version of Teleport are you using? Are you using the community version or the enterprise version?
We pay for enterprise just because like RBAC and SAML IDP is so incredibly huge for us. Like being able to just quickly provision users via Okta is great. Literally every application in our company now goes through Okta, and coming from a background where that was not the case, like it is so nice when I can just go to, our Okta dashboard and get into everything that I need to.
Awesome. And then I think a question came up on the chat here in terms of which SEIM tool you're using. I think you said Humio, but yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit more what was that like and why you chose Humio?
Yeah, so, and not to get super into it, Humio basically for me meets the implementation details around their search query language that developers like, and makes finance happy in terms of their pricing structure. It makes me happy in terms of their security and management infrastructure. So it's one of these things where for us, Humio, like it checked all the boxes that we needed. So running with it, and I do like I've not had a bad experience with them as a company, but that's just my anecdote.
But you might vary. Yeah, sure. Next question we have is, do users prefer using the web UI or TSH when connecting to nodes?
I think it's about a 50-50 mix, and it gradates. The more manager you are, the more likely you are to use the web UI. I will say,
is it a religious debate? Is it, in the company or not really?
No, I don't think it particularly comes up. I will say for me though, I go back and forth between the web UI and the TSH terminal stuff, because when I'm on call, like I have legitimately had to pull off the side of the highway, log in to teleport on my phone with an external keyboard to like fix a server because it was down, and then keep driving into the office or wherever I was going. So like massive plus on the web UI, totally works in mobile Safari if you're willing to hold your nose a little bit. Like 10 out of 10 would do again if you're desperate in a pinch. So like don't I would say like if you're thinking to not run the web UI, like maybe reconsider running it, because like I'd say every user will have a legitimate use case for touching it at least once.
I appreciate that. If there are any more questions, definitely put them in the Q&A. I have just a couple more. So advice for people getting started today, what advice would you give them? I mean, obviously they don't have to create their own packages, which is good. But yeah, where would you start? Or, obviously start with your talk maybe, but what other advice would you give them?
What I think suggest doing is like, one, really sit down and think about like, how does your organization currently access servers, and try to come up with a list of acceptance criteria that you can then go and like look at tooling with. I think Teleport will probably hit it, since most companies are just, SSH in a box, user gets SSH access. But like really think through some of the intricacies, like, doesn't matter that, everybody logs in as a shared user, or is it the case to where it has to be, a personal named user with a set UID and a set GUID? Like knowing that stuff will then help inform like, well, how am I going to roll this out? How am I going to configure it? Because, Teleport can read in attributes to, get user access, stuff like that. I think once you have that done, it's worth getting it set up and running it alongside your traditional SSH setup for a month or two, just so that way you can build some administrative confidence going through it, and users can start building up acceptance of the tooling. And then from there, it's just a matter of, picking your flag day and really making sure that everybody who hasn't switched over has at least tried to switch. Just because, again, like there are certain tools that don't support certificate authentication, and the faster that you can identify those, the easier time that you're going to have either pulling in a replacement tool or working with that tool's vendor to get patches put in place so it does support certificate authentication, so you can do that move.
Excellent, Hunter. Those are the main questions. I had one question, which is a completely unfair question, because I think we might have a couple of engineers from the Teleport team on this. One wish from you. If you had one wish for Teleport, what would it be? I've not asked Hunter this before.
Oh boy, I get to wish for something.
I can't guarantee that I can fulfill any of these wishes, but yeah, what's your one wish?
Ooh, okay. I'm going to exclude things that I've seen on the roadmap, because I have a general sense of what's coming. Okay, I would like and you could pay me to do this, honestly, like I am that badly wanting this. I want to tag the logging support based off of application internal component, because the one thing that I've run into trying to get debug logs for Teleport is it either goes from no actionable logs to Niagara Falls. And I would love something to where I could say, I don't care about users, I just care about the trusted cluster bit. Or I don't care about the trusted cluster bit, just show me user authentication errors and node login in the logs in my terminal.
Well, like I said, can't promise that, but I will speak to our product management team. I'll chat with Ben and go, hey, let's see what we can do. But definitely appreciate all your time and effort putting this thing together. For the audience out there, we will put a transcription together. We had sort of a couple of ideas of sort of what to do next. Hunter talked a little about this. It's like, hey, read the admin guide, obviously download it. And then we have a community forum out there you can ask some of your questions on. Obviously, us as a company, we're happy to engage. But again, Hunter, thank you for your time. And, thank Decisiv on our part for allowing you to spend this time with us. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday afternoon.
Excellent. Thank you.